In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. He taught us how to live, but he came in order to die for the sins of the world. After the Last Supper, Jesus went down to the Garden of Gethsemane in order to pray. Jesus, knowing the torments he was about to endure, asked, "Father, if thou wilt, remove this chalice from me, but yet not my will, but thine be done." By Jesus saying this, he illustrates that he is both God and man. His knowledge of the future illuminates his divinity, and his prayer for the chalice to pass from him shows his humanity. Jesus did suffer in his death. He even felt fear, and he began to fear and be heavy. Mark 14:33. Jesus did not suffer and die because of some deficiency in his divinity. No, it was by his own will that Jesus suffered and died for humanity. He was offered because he willed it. Isaiah 53:7. Jesus, suffering great agony in the garden, was strengthened by an angel from heaven. But as the Venerable Bede says, the strength did not diminish, but increase the sorrows. For in the next verse, in the Gospel of Luke, we read, "His sweat became as drops of blood, trickling down upon the ground." Jesus left the garden, and coming to his disciples, he said, "The hour is come. Behold, the Son of Man shall be betrayed into the hands of sinners." And while he was still speaking, Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, came and betrayed Jesus with a kiss. For it had been arranged that whoever Judas kissed was to be taken. Once the soldiers saw that it was Jesus who was kissed, they laid hold of him, and eventually Jesus arrived at the court of the high priest. God had allowed himself to be captured by mere men, by lowly sinners. But what kept God bound? It was not the strength of the soldiers, but the love of God for mankind. Jesus was brought to the court because the chief priests of the court wanted to put him to death. The high priest asked Jesus, "Art thou the Christ, the Son of the blessed God?" Jesus answered and said, "I am. And you shall see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of the power of God, and coming with the clouds of heaven." The high priest then said, "What need we further witnesses? You have heard the blasphemy. What think you?" And they all condemned him to death. After condemning Jesus to death, they spat on his face and buffeted him, fulfilling the prophecy in Isaiah chapter 50, verse 6. "I have not turned away my face from them that rebuked me and spit upon me." Jesus was then handed over to Pontius Pilate in order to be condemned to death. Pilate said to the Jews, "Judge him according to your law." But the Jews answered, "It is not lawful for us to put any man to death." After questioning Jesus, Pilate asked, "I find no cause in him, but you have a custom that I should release one unto you at the Passover. Will you, therefore, that I release unto you the King of the Jews?" But the crowd cried, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Barabbas means Son of the Father. When the Son of the Eternal Father was standing before them, they chose not him, but instead Barabbas. Then, therefore, Pilate took Jesus and scourged him. Scourging was a punishment reserved for slaves only. God not only humbled himself and became man, but he allowed himself to be punished as a slave. Humanity had made itself a slave to sin, and Jesus, offering himself as satisfaction for the sins of mankind, took the most humble form of a slave. "For the wickedness of my people I have struck him." Isaiah 53:8. Jesus was scourged again and again, fulfilling Psalm 58:27, "And they have added to the grief of my wounds." In the Old Testament, God put a limit on how many scourges the Jews could give in order to preserve the dignity of the convicted, yet so that they exceed not the number 40, lest thy brother depart, shamefully torn. Deuteronomy 25:3. But Jesus did not put such a limit on his own torments, because he was being scourged by the Romans, who had no limits on how many strokes to give a man. After his scourging, The soldiers made a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They also put on him a purple garment. Then they all mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Pilate originally planned to scourge Jesus and let him go, hoping that scourging and humiliating Jesus would satisfy the anger of the Jews. "I will therefore scourge him and let him go." Luke 23:22. After Jesus had his flesh torn to pieces and was crowned with thorns, he was unrecognizable, fulfilling Isaiah 53:10. And we esteemed him as a leper and as one smitten of God. So humiliated and beaten was the body of Jesus that Pontius Pilate showed him to the crowd, saying, "Behold the man." But the Jews were not satisfied. They cried, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to the crowd, "Take him you and crucify him, for I find no cause in him." The Jews answered him, "Our law says he ought to die for making himself the Son of God." Pilate, hearing this, feared the more. Pilate entered the hall again to question Jesus. "Where do you come from?" Pilate asked, but Jesus gave no answer. Pilate then said to him, "Speakest thou not to me? Knowest thou not I have the power to crucify thee, and I have the power to release thee?" Jesus answered, "Thou shouldst not have any power against me, unless it were given to thee from above. Therefore, he that hath delivered me to thee hath the greater sin." Then Pilate sought to release Jesus, but the Jews cried out, saying, "If thou release this man, thou art not Caesar's friend. For whosoever maketh himself a king speaketh against Caesar." Hearing this, Pilate brought forth Jesus and said to the Jews, "Behold, your king." But they cried out, "Away with him! Away with him! Crucify him!" Pilate said, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priest answered, "We have no king but Caesar." And therefore Pilate gave him up to be crucified. The scourged and beaten Jesus was made to carry his own cross to Calvary, where he would be crucified. Jesus, scourged and torn, carrying his cross, falls for the first time. Picking himself back up, Jesus continues to Calvary. On the way, he sees his mother. How awful it must have been for a mother to see her son so beaten and bruised. The prophecy of Saint Simeon must have echoed in her mind. "Behold, this child is set for the fall." Seeing Jesus drained of blood and barely alive, the hateful enemies of Jesus feared he would die before reaching Calvary. They wanted him to die on the cross, because it is written in Deuteronomy 21:23, "For he is accursed of God that hangeth on a tree." For this reason, they had Simon the Cyrene help Jesus carry his cross. Next, Jesus meets the holy woman Veronica, who wipes his face, bathed with blood and sweat. The towel she wiped his face with is miraculously given an impression of the face of Jesus. Even while suffering and dying, Jesus continues to work miracles. Again, Jesus falls, renewing the pains of his torments. Bearing so much pain and so much sorrow, Jesus continues his journey to the crucifixion. Jesus then meets the daughters of Jerusalem, weeping for him because they see him so torn and so bruised. Although Jesus was suffering more than any man can ever imagine, in his selflessness, he tells the women, "Weep not for me, but for your children." Jesus falls for the third and final time. His pain and exhaustion were extreme. 3 times Jesus fell. He fell 3 times to show how the sins of mankind so offended all 3 persons of the Divine Trinity. He fell 3 times to show the completeness of his suffering. When Jesus arrived at Calvary, he was stripped of his garments and nailed to the cross. The noise of the hammers resounded through the mountains. His sacred hands, that had healed so many, now transfixed with nails. His sacred feet, so wearied from seeking after lost sheep, now pierced to the cross. The cross was raised, and Jesus hung between two thieves. He was reputed with the wicked. Isaiah 53:12. On the cross was written, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. The chief priests came to Pilate and said, Write not, the King of the Jews, but that he said, I am the King of the Jews. Pilate answered, What I have written, I have written. Jesus, while he was suffering on the cross, cried out, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? The Eternal Father, seeing him charged with the sins of all men, for which he was then atoning to the divine justice, abandons him to a death of pure, unmixed pain. Jesus would not allow his divinity to comfort him at his death, and for this reason, his death is worse than the death of all the martyrs, because it was full of desolation and lacking any comfort. Afterwards, Jesus, knowing that all things were now accomplished, that the Scriptures might be fulfilled, said, I thirst. And they, putting a sponge full of vinegar on some hyssop, raised it to his lips. When Jesus took the vinegar, he said, It is finished. Jesus then cried out with a loud voice and said, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. And saying this, he died for the sins of the world.